If BCG Casey feels strange to you, that's because it sits in a very specific space between a normal case interview and a normal online test. It isn't a free-flowing conversation like a traditional live case, but it also isn't a generic aptitude test where you just click through random logic questions. It's a structured business case assessment. You've been given a business problem. You moved through a fixed sequence of questions. You interpret exhibits, you do the math, make judgment calls, avoid traps, and then finish with a concise executive recommendation. And that's exactly why we wanted to make this video. Because the way to do well in Casey is not to try and be sophisticated and quick. It's to understand the rhythm of the assessment, what the question is really asking, what evidence matters most, what the trap answers are, and how to stay concise and accurate from start to finish. So in this video, we're going to walk you through one real Casey flow, step by step, using the Morgan Automotive case inside Cognidoor. We'll go from the case intro all the way through to the final recommendation. And by the end, the goal is to do two things. First, to help you understand how to perform better on Casey itself. Second, to show you why practicing is useful, because the value is not just in knowing the right answer. It's in understanding the logic, the traps, and the style of response the assessment is looking for. So, let's get into it. Here, we can see the Cognidoor BCG Casey library. For our example, we're going to click on the Morgan Automotive case. All right, here we can see the Casey interface. So first thing we do is note that we have 35 minutes to complete the assessment. So we're going to click Begin. When we click Begin, we're given question 1, but we're also given with case context. Morgan Automotive has missed profit guidance and management wants a recovery plan in 6 weeks. Different people inside the business are blaming different things. Dealership is blaming a tougher market. Sales leaders are pointing to discounting and weaker showroom traffic. Finance thinks the issue may go deeper into mix, warranty leakage, or service utilization. And the board is not asking for a vague turnaround plan. The board wants to know what the real margin leak is, which lever matters most, and what management should do first without damaging customer experience. So the framing matters because from the start, this is not a give me 10 ideas case. This is a diagnose the margin decline, quantify the main issue, and recommend the first recovery lever case. That already tells us how to answer everything that follows. We keep it commercial, we keep it prioritized, we keep it specifics. We begin with the case intro, and the system already tells us that we have 10 questions to answer in total. That matters because it reminds you that this is a finite sequence, so you want to pace yourself. You've got just over half an hour for the full case, which is enough time to think, but not enough time to wonder. So the aim is to have a steady rhythm of a few minutes per question and save a little slack for the final recommendation. All right, let's get into question 1. Question 1 asks, what clarifying questions would you ask before sharing your structure for this case? First, let's understand a few things. How big is the profit shortfall versus the prior baseline? And where does it show up in the P&L? That's the first choice. The second is, which business line or driver explains most of the decline once price, mix, warranty, and service are separated? Those are the strongest choices already because they get us to the closest actual decision. So we really don't need to look at the others around the turnaround message or what we can learn from dealers or what KPIs to look at. To answer question 1 about clarifying questions, option A and B are the best. So before I structure anything, I want to know how large the hole is and what is causing most of it. That is a much stronger approach than jumping straight into messaging or broad benchmarking. The first question already teaches us something important about Casey. BCG wants relevant clarification, not impressive sounding clarification. So ask the questions that make the decision clearer fast. And for us, that's A and B. Great. We've gotten feedback that that's correct. Moving to question 2. Here, we unlock Exhibit 1, which is a gross margin by line of business table. You can just click on it on the right side of the panel, and this is what you get. It gives us revenue share, prior gross margin, and current gross margin for new vehicles, used vehicles, services and parts, and finance and insurance. Right. So question 2 is asking us a simple question. Assume total revenue of $2.8 billion. What is the current gross profit using Exhibit 1? Well, here's the setup. Take the total revenue of $2 billion. For each line of business, new, used, service, and F&I, we multiply that $2 billion by each line's revenue share and that line's gross margin. And then we add the 4 results together. When you run the calculation on Exhibit 1 numbers, you get a gross profit of about $416.5 million, which rounds up, as the question asks us to do, to $416 million. This is one of those Casey questions where the arithmetic is not actually the hard part. The hard part is keeping your setup clean. The usual mistakes are forgetting to use revenue share, using prior margins instead of current margins, and slipping on rounding and scale. And this question is not just math for the sake of math. No, it's establishing the current profit base before we diagnose the decline. So already, the case is reinforcing a strong consulting habit. Get the baseline right before you start anything else. So for our answer here, we're going to put 416. And there we go. Our answer is correct. And we also get the exact formula used to calculate the answer. All right, moving on to question 3. Here we get Exhibit 2. And Exhibit 2 gives us operational indicators year over year, as well as a Morgan versus peer benchmark view by profit driver. The key signals include sales per salesperson down, inventory days up, service bay utilization down, F&I, and marketing spend up. What is question 3? It asks us, which mechanism best explains the gross margin deterioration once the internal and external signals are combined? Well, looking at the options, the answer here is B, pricing and discounting pressure in the core vehicle lines. And here's how we figure that out. Part of this question is to understand that judgment matters. The exhibit evidence points most strongly to the pressure in core vehicle lines. So if we look at Exhibit 4 and we look at Exhibit 2, we can understand this. That doesn't mean that other issues are irrelevant. It means the strongest primary explanation, once the evidence is combined, is pricing and discounting pressure. While it might be tempting to say it's the mix option because it sounds sophisticated, it's weaker than the direct evidence in the exhibits. So, for question 3, based off of the exhibits, what we're going to pick is pricing and discounting pressure. And once again, we can see this from Exhibit 4. All right, let's move on. Moving on to question 4, which is an open text question. Listed 3 to 5 criteria that management should use to choose the first recovery lever in 5 lines maximum. This is where people sometimes get too fluffy. They start writing things like long-term value, stakeholder alignment, or strategic optionality. But the scoring logic here is looking for 3 things. and it always is. We need to understand the economics of the business. We need to understand the feasibility and speed with which we can implement our solution. And we always need to understand risk. So right here, I'm going to put economics, speed of execution, and consumer risk. Why those three? Economics forces us to anchor on the actual $47 million profit hole. The first lever has to move the needle on that number. Otherwise, it's not worth being first. Why speed and feasibility? Well, speed and feasibility match the board's 6-week recovery window. A lever that looks great on paper but takes a year to implement will not save us this quarter. And customer execution or customer risk makes us ask, what could break if we pull these levers? Could we damage the brand? Could we lose volume? Or could we fail in the field? Together, these three criteria screen the lever exactly the way management needs. It asks the questions, is this financially meaningful against our 47 million profit gap? Can we do this quickly? And can we do it without losing consumers? And that is how BCG wants you to think here, like an operator on the first move, not a student building a pretty list. So always remember, think economics, speed, and risk, particularly when you're dealing with profit questions. All right, let's submit. There we go. Question 5. Now, for question 5, we unlock Exhibit 3, which includes a management note on the leadership crisis in the business. It reinforces that different people internally are blaming different things, like softer showroom traffic, a tougher market, uneven execution, warranty rework, and a weaker attach and used F&I. Let's understand that context really well, and then get to question 5. Question 5 asks us, what is the magnitude of the gross profit decline versus the prior year in dollars? Enter the magnitude only for a decline. Use Exhibit 3 and 4. Having understood the drivers of disagreement from Exhibit 3, we can look at Exhibit 4. Right. So, what we need to understand here is where our source of truth is. This is very similar to question 2, right? I'll tell you up front that the number is 47. But why? Right. If we look at question 2 and repeat the exact calculations from there, but plug in the prior margins from the exhibit instead of the current margins, what we get is prior year gross profit. And that gross profit is about $463.5 million. What we already know from question 2 is that the current gross profit is $416.5 million. Therefore, the difference between 463 and 416 is 47. And that is the gross profit decline. And that is our $47 million profit gap, right? So the work solution gives us 47 millions, and the system is very explicit that because this is a decline, we should enter the magnitude of decline only. So we do not type negative 47, but we type 47 because that is the magnitude of decline. So once we have that answer, there we go. We can see the calculation is prior year's profits minus current year's profits, which gives us 47 million. All right. Now, let's move on to question 6. Another short open text question. What is the first diagnostic hypothesis management should test next to confirm the real root cause of the margin decline? A strong answer here is to test whether the biggest profit leak is concentrated in core vehicle margin deterioration, especially pricing and discounting pressure. And remember that that was one of our answers from before. And we can figure this out by drilling into margin performance by dealership, sales team, and discount behavior versus peer benchmarks. This is a strong answer because it does three things. It identifies a key likely driver, it ties that diagnosis to evidence, and it names the next test for figuring out if we're on course. That is the discipline BCG is looking for. Saying we should analyze more is not enough. This question is looking for the so what of the analysis. You have to say what you think the root cause is and what exactly management should stress test next. And from our exhibits so far and the questions we've answered before, we can understand that part of the root cause is pricing and discount pressure. And to understand those two metrics, we need to look at performance by dealership. We need to understand how sales teams are performing. And then we need to understand the discount behavior of our business against other businesses. That will help us validate if this is a market issue or a dealer-specific issue. All right. Now, looking at the answer that we put, you may notice that Casey recommended better ways to write down that answer. Name the suspected root cause. Don't just reinstate the decline. And then tie the hypothesis to the evidence from the exhibits. And from the hypothesis and from the evidence, we could see that pricing and discount pressure are the particular issues here. So we could have talked about that a bit more. And next, we could specify the targeted test management should run. And next, we could specify the targeted tests that management should run. And the tests, like I mentioned before, were to look at discount behavior of our competitors so that we can understand the benchmarks. So while our answer was adequate, it wasn't quite specific and robust enough for what BCG is looking for. So in future, it's very important to remember, be specific, be precise, and be evidence-based at all times. All right, moving on to question 7. The question is, if management tries to recover $10 million through F&I alone, how many margin percentage points would be needed? Round up to 2 decimals and omit the percentage sign. Looking at exhibits, what we know is that F&I revenue is about $200 million. So what we're really doing is trying to figure out what proportion of 10 million is 200 million. And that's very simple math. 10 million divided by 200 million is equals to 5 percentage points. And that gives us the answer of 5. Now, the question did ask us to round to 2 decimals, which means our answer will be 5.00. And that's it. Perfect. Moving on to question 8. Question 8 is a core decision question. It asks, which recovery lever should management prioritize first once impact, speed, and confidence are weighted together? So the correct answer here, looking at the list of questions, would definitely be B. Fix the biggest verified margin leak first, then sequence mix and cause actions behind it. That's exactly aligned with the case prompt and what the board wants to see. Management wants a financially meaningful move, feasible within 1 quarter and 1 prioritized action. So the right answer isn't to do everything. It's to identify the biggest cause of our profit gap, and it's to fix that fast. This is one of the strongest Casey lessons in the entire case so far. The best answer is often the one that commits to the first move, without pretending that every problem should be solved at once. Always remember that. Prioritize, sequence, and then move. All right, and with 11 minutes to spare, we move on to question 9. The question asks, select the 3 risks management should watch most closely during the profit recovery plan. Looking at the options, the correct answers here are regulatory, execution, and data. Or said in another way, regulatory risk, execution risk, and data risk. These are the 3 most likely to break the plan. Regulatory because any regulatory or warranty policy changes create margin pressure. The business could lose margin. Any execution failure will stop the lever from sticking in the field and will definitely fall short of the board's 6-week requirement. And a weak diagnosis of the problem could mean management is solving the wrong problem, therefore spending money on the wrong thing, therefore failing to deliver on the board's mandate. And that is another important Casey habit. The best risks are not just generally the big, scary stuff. They're the risks that are most likely to break the actual case logic. So we should understand that. So we're going to pick regulatory risk, execution risk, and diagnosis risk. Moving on to question 10. The question goes, you meet the CEO in the hallway. What profit recovery plan should Morgan Automotive run first? Answer in 100 words maximum. Include the financial logic, the key risk, and the immediate management action. This is the capstone moment of the entire Casey assessment. And the most important thing to do here is do not be generic. The rubric behind this question is looking for 4 required components: a recommendation, a number, a risk, and a next step. So given everything that we've collected about how this business is performing, the risks, the performance gap, and what we need to achieve the board's mandate, the strong answer sounds like this. Morgan should first stabilize margin in the core vehicle business and lift F&I attach rate in a focused way because the company is facing a $47 million gross profit decline. And even recovering $10 million through F&I alone would require about 5 margin points. That tells us that F&I is part of the answer, but not the whole answer. We also need a cleaner pricing and discount discipline in the main vehicle lines. The main risk is competitive pricing pressure or weak field execution. The immediate next step is to pilot combined margin and attach rate play in at least 3 dealerships. Measure impact quickly and then scale this approach if the results are positive. Now, I may have sounded sophisticated, but it's really simple. So all we do in this part of Casey is put together all the answers that we got from the assessment and understand the problem we're trying to solve and also put in the key logic. And right here, you can add your recommendation. But on Cognidoor's simulation, what you have are the key numbers, the main risks, and the next steps. And once you put that in the template, you'll notice that we have what the recommendation would look like right here at the bottom. So let's do that. In Cognidoor's guided mode, you're able to input your answer while understanding the key KPIs required for a strong answer. Once we go to the exam mode, all we do is we put in the answer and click send. So our recommendation works because it includes the first lever, the financial logic, the key risk, and the next management action. That's exactly what the rubric wants. The biggest mistake people make here is becoming generic. They say things like, Morgan should generally turn the business around, or management should improve everything at once, or the next step is to move forward carefully. That's not strong enough. The best Casey answers are not long. They're sharp, they're precise, and they commit to a next action, and they support that recommendation with 1 or 2 numbers from the case. All right, now that we're done, what we can do is understand Cognidoor's coach summary, which helps us see how we were scored in the assessment and which gives us tips on where we need to improve on. So all we need to do is click see your coach summary. And after a few minutes, it'll load. I really love this assessment, so I might rate my experience at a 4.5. So once we're done doing that, what we can see here is that the coach scored us at 92 out of 100. 92%? That's pretty cool. I prefer dark mode, so I'm just going to switch to dark mode because it's readable for me. And the coach breakdown tells us how we performed. We have a debrief that tells us that it was a good case overall, and the main thing that we need to sharpen now is the final recommendation. The coach tells us what exactly we need to sharpen about our final recommendation. It tells us different metrics, our strongest area, the biggest issues we have, and what we should focus on next. So for us, it was our recommendation. And it also has a really cool feature that is actually part of the real Casey, which is to record your final recommendation. So remember, when you take the assessment, to dress well and to practice speaking in front of a recording. So on Cognidoor, you can click this button right here to start recording a 60-second video of you saying your recommendation. Once it's done that, you can move on. You can understand how you performed in structuring, how you performed mathematically, whether your business judgment from the more qualitative questions was good, and whether your interpretation of all the different charts was also good. You can also see how much time you spent in the assessment, how much time you spent in the final question, and you can understand if you got any "are you sure" prompts. And what "are you sure" prompts are prompts from BCG Casey that ask if you're sure about the answer. Anytime you get an "are you sure" prompt, you must know that your answer is not correct and you need to revisit it. And remember, for your recommendations, they should not be too vague. They should have the key numbers, they should list the main risks, and they should always have a next step. That's how you ace BCG Casey. Use Cognidoor's coach to fully understand where you did well, what you can improve on, and to rehearse your recommendations over and over until you get it right and are ready to take the BCG Casey assessment. If this walkthrough made Casey feel clearer, more structured, and more beatable, then that is exactly what it was supposed to do. Because Casey becomes much less mysterious once you understand a few things. The first questions matter. A lot of the difficulty is not hard math. It's interpreting the question correctly and avoiding traps. The best answer is usually the one that most directly fits the evidence and decisions being asked. Open text questions can still be structured, and the final recommendation is not a recap. It's a commitment using the recap as evidence. And that's why Cognidoor is useful here. It helps you understand not only what the accepted answer was, but why that answer was stronger, what the trap was trying to get you to do, and whether your wording was too generic, and what a better executive close would sound like. That is what turns practice into improvement. If you want to practice this kind of case in a way that is structured, coachable, and grounded in the real answer logic, check out Cognidoor. And if you found this walkthrough useful, stay with us on the channel, because we're going to break down other Cognidoor assessments in the same practical and step-by-step way. See you in the next one.